There is a province in eastern Canada, larger than Japan, where the entire population would not fill a mid-sized football stadium. Newfoundland and Labrador holds fewer than 550,000 people, and in the decade after the cod fishery collapsed, it hemorrhaged 10% of its population. The median age is the oldest in Canada. The per capita debt is the highest in the country. You can buy a house here for the price of a used phone. 9 communities have been officially abandoned since 2000. The government pays people to leave, and still, the emptying continues. What happened to Newfoundland? Hit subscribe. I promise this is worth your time. To understand why Newfoundland is emptying, you have to understand what brought people here in the first place. And the answer is deceptively simple. Fish. Cod, specifically. Atlantic cod drew European fishermen to the Grand Banks off Newfoundland's eastern coast, beginning in the late 1400s, and by the early 1500s, Basque, Portuguese, French, and English fleets were crossing the Atlantic every season to harvest what seemed like an inexhaustible supply of the species. The cod fishery was not a peripheral industry. It was the entire reason Newfoundland was settled by Europeans. The fish were so plentiful that early explorers described lowering baskets into the water and pulling them back up overflowing. For nearly 500 years, cod fishing was the economic, cultural, and spiritual backbone of the province. Entire communities were established in remote coastal coves for the sole purpose of proximity to good fishing grounds. These communities were called outports, and at their peak, there were well over 1,000 of them scattered across Newfoundland's 9,600 kilometers of coastline. The outports operated as self-sustaining ecosystems of human survival. Men fished, women processed the catch, splitting and salting cod on wooden flakes to dry in the wind and sun. Children grew up knowing they would do the same. The salt cod was shipped to markets in Europe, the Caribbean, and South America, and in return, the outports received the basic necessities of life. It was not a wealthy existence, but it was a functional one, and it persisted for centuries. Beyond fishing, Newfoundland's interior attracted people for different reasons. Iron ore mining on Bell Island in Conception Bay began in 1895, and at its height, employed thousands of workers, swelling the island's population past 12,000. In central Newfoundland, the American Smelting and Refining Company carved the town of Boucans out of raw wilderness in 1927 to mine zinc, lead, and copper, creating a company town where nothing had existed before. On the Burin Peninsula, fluorspar mining sustained the community of St. Lawrence from the 1930s onward. Paper mills at Grand Falls and Corner Brook drew workers from coastal outports into the interior. The Trans-Canada Highway, completed across Newfoundland in 1965, connected communities that had previously relied on coastal boats and seasonal ice roads. And in the late 1970s, the discovery of oil off the coast, first at Hibernia and later at Terra Nova and White Rose, offered the tantalizing promise that Newfoundland might finally diversify its economy beyond the sea. But every single one of these industries followed the same devastating pattern. They boomed, they employed, they created communities, and then they contracted or disappeared entirely, leaving behind populations with no alternative and no transferable skills in places that had been built around a single employer. Bell Island's iron ore mines closed in 1966 when cheaper open-pit operations in Labrador and South America undercut the island's submarine mining operation. The population, which had exceeded 12,000 in 1961, collapsed to just over 2,000 by the 2021 census. Boucans mines shut down in 1984 after 57 years of continuous operation, and the population dropped from 3,000 at its peak to 590 by 2021. The paper mills at Grand Falls, Windsor survived longer, but the global decline of newsprint eventually claimed those too. And then came the event that broke everything. On the 2nd of July 1992, Federal Fisheries Minister John Crosbie stood in a hotel conference room in St. John's and announced a moratorium on the northern cod fishery. The stocks had collapsed to less than 1% of their historic levels. Decades of industrial-scale overfishing by factory freezer trawlers, equipped with sonar and radar, had done what 500 years of traditional fishing had not. The fish were gone. The moratorium was supposed to last 2 years. It lasted 32, not lifted until 2024, and even then the total allowable catch was set at a cautious 18,000 tons. It was the largest industrial closure in Canadian history. 30,000 fishers and plant workers lost their jobs in a single event, roughly 12% of the entire provincial labor force. Over 400 coastal communities watched their reason for existing evaporate overnight. Fish plants closed, boats sat rotting at docks. The federal government introduced emergency assistance programs, the Northern Cod Adjustment and Recovery Program, and later the Atlantic Groundfish Strategy. But these were widely regarded as inadequate. The retraining taught skills for jobs that did not exist in the communities where people lived. The income support expired, and slowly, then rapidly, people began to leave. The first wave of migration after the moratorium followed the money westward. Young Newfoundlanders, predominantly men in their 20s and 30s, boarded planes and buses bound for the Alberta oil sands. Fort McMurray became so densely populated with Newfoundlanders that locals joked it was the province's second-largest city. Entire families followed, siblings, cousins, friends from the same outports. The paychecks were extraordinary by Newfoundland standards, and the work, though brutal, was steady. But this migration created a cascading effect back home. With the young and working-age population draining away, the communities left behind grew older and smaller. Schools lost students and merged or closed. Health clinics reduced services. Grocery stores shut down for lack of customers. Ferry routes that serviced isolated outports became increasingly expensive to justify for a shrinking ridership. The provincial government was spending over $76 million annually on a marine transportation network, serving communities where, in some cases, fewer than 100 people remained. What emerged was a culture of outmigration so deeply embedded that it became generational. Children in rural Newfoundland grew up knowing that leaving was not a possibility, but an inevitability. The fishery was gone, the mines were gone, the mills were closing, and the only rational choice was to get an education and get out. The province's population, which had peaked at over 580,000 in the early 1990s, dropped below 510,000 by 2007. A brief recovery driven by offshore oil brought some growth from 2008 to 2017, but when oil prices collapsed, the decline resumed. Natural population change has been negative since 2012. In the first 9 months of 2024, more than 5,000 people died in the province, while fewer than 2,500 were born. Drive the coastal highways outside St. John's, and you begin to see what this looks like in practice. Not all at once, but gradually, the way a photograph fades when left in sunlight too long. Number 1. The South Coast. From Burgeo to Francois to Grey River. The south coast of Newfoundland is one of the most stunningly beautiful and devastatingly empty stretches of coastline in North America. It is a landscape of 600-foot headlands disappearing into fog, fjords cutting deep into ancient rock, and communities clinging to narrow strips of land between the cliffs and the sea. Many of these communities have no road access whatsoever. The only way in or out is by boat or helicopter. Francois, pronounced François, sits at the end of a small fjord on the south coast and has been there since the 1700s. It has no road, no cars, no pavement. Residents walk along concrete pathways and boardwalks between houses that cling to steep hillsides. As of the 2021 census, the population was 64, down 28% from 89 just 5 years earlier. Most permanent residents are senior citizens. The all-grade school had 4 students. The weekly highlight was Wednesday night mixed darts at the community hall. In 2021, the community held a resettlement vote under the provincial government's community relocation policy, and 42 of 53 eligible voters said no. They chose to stay, but the mayor of nearby Goltois captured the reality when she said of these outports that resettlement might not come this year or in 10 years, but it would come. It was inevitable. Grand Bruit, whose name means great noise in French, after the waterfall that once divided the community in two, was also on this coast. By 2009, only 31 people remained, almost all of them elderly. 26 of the 31 voted to relocate, and the community was officially resettled in 2010. Each household received $100,000. The houses still stand, slowly being reclaimed by weather and vegetation, accessible only by boat, in a place where the silence is so complete you can hear the ocean breathing against the cliffs. Grey River, Burgeo, McCallum. Each of these South Coast communities tells the same story in slightly different words. Populations halved and halved again. Fish plants closed. Ferry services cut back. Young people gone. Houses sitting empty with curtains still in the windows, as if the owners went out for groceries and never returned. Number 2. Belle Island in Conception Bay. Belle Island sits in Conception Bay, just a 20-minute ferry ride from Portugal Cove, which is itself a short drive from the provincial capital of St. John's. The proximity to the capital makes what has happened to Belle Island all the more jarring, because this is not some isolated outport hundreds of kilometers from civilization. This is an island you can see from shore on a clear day, and it has been bleeding for 60 years. The iron ore mines that opened at Wabana in 1895 turned Belle Island into one of the most important industrial centers in all of Newfoundland. At its peak, the island was the second largest community in the entire Dominion. Workers came from across the province and beyond, and the population swelled past 12,000 by 1961. The mines extended kilometers under the floor of Conception Bay in a submarine operation that was, at one point, one of the largest of its kind in the world. Then, gradually, and then suddenly, the mines became uncompetitive. Cheaper ore from open-pit operations in Labrador, Venezuela, and West Africa undercut Belle Island's expensive underground extraction. The last mine closed on the 30th of June 1966, and 71 years of industrial mining came to an abrupt end. The collapse was catastrophic. Hundreds of mining families packed up and left, many to factory towns in Ontario. Galt, a small city in southern Ontario, absorbed so many Belle Islanders that locals called it Little Belle Island. The population dropped from over 12,000 to under 4,000 by 1996. By the 2021 census, it had fallen further to 2,085, a decline of 83% over 6 decades. The median age on Belle Island in 2021 was 58, a full decade older than the already old provincial median. The employment rate was 23%, less than half the provincial average. Over 40% of the population lived in a low-income family, nearly 4 times the national rate. In 2025, the island's only gas station closed permanently due to supply issues, though it later reopened under new ownership. Houses on Belle Island can be found for prices that would not cover a month's rent in Toronto or Vancouver, but the mines are flooded, the ore is gone, and the population continues its slow, relentless decline. Number 3. Buckens and Central Newfoundland. Drive inland from the coast, away from the fishing outports, and into the boreal interior, and you enter a different kind of emptiness. The Trans-Canada Highway crosses central Newfoundland through vast stretches of spruce forest, bog, and barrens, where you can drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. Towns here were not built around harbors and fishing stages. They were built around mines, mills, and railway junctions, and when those industries disappeared, the towns had even less reason to exist than the outports, because at least the outports had the ocean. Buchans was carved from raw wilderness in 1927 by the American Smelting and Refining Company to exploit deposits of zinc, lead, and copper that were among the highest-grade base metal ores in Canadian history. It was the definition of a company town. The mining company built the houses, ran the stores, employed the police, and controlled virtually every aspect of daily life. At its peak, the population held steady between 2,500 and 3,000. The mines operated for 57 years, producing over 16 million tons of ore. Then, in September of 1984, all mining production ceased. The ore was exhausted. The collapse was predictable and total. The company began divesting its houses and infrastructure in 1977, and by 1982, only 12 workers remained on the property, down from 550 just 4 years earlier. By 2021, the population had fallen to 590. The town sits 70 kilometers off the Trans-Canada Highway at the end of a paved road that leads nowhere else. The mine shafts are sealed. The headframes that once dominated the skyline have been demolished. The soil itself is contaminated with 10 different toxins, including lead, arsenic, uranium, and copper, left over from decades of mining operations, and residents were advised to get their blood tested for pollutants. Houses in Bukans can be purchased for prices that barely register as real estate transactions in any other part of the country. Number 4. Great Harbor Deep and the Northern Peninsula. The northern peninsula of Newfoundland stretches northward like a bony finger pointing toward Labrador, and along its western coast, communities that once thrived on the inshore cod fishery have been emptying since the moratorium. Great Harbor Deep, located in an isolated pocket on the peninsula's coast, was one of the most dramatic casualties. After the moratorium, work in Great Harbor Deep became almost impossible to find. Education was bleak. Children had to leave in grade 10, boarding ferries each September to attend school in other communities, living away from their parents from the age of 15. In 1993, just 1 year after the moratorium, a resident named Pamela Robson told a CBC reporter that anyone who could see a future in the community was kidding themselves. She was right. After years of acrimonious internal debate, Great Harbor Deep took a government relocation package in 2002. The community was officially resettled. The houses were abandoned. The roads, such as they were, began to deteriorate. Nature started the slow process of reclaiming what had been settled for generations. Today, Great Harbor Deep exists only on maps and in the memories of the people who once lived there. You can still reach it by boat from Sops Arm or Hamden, and the buildings are reportedly still partially standing, but there is nothing left to sustain human habitation. Subscribe to show that these videos actually matter and make a difference. Number 5. Harbor Breton and the Conegra Peninsula. Harbor Breton, on the Conegra Peninsula in Fortune Bay, was for centuries one of the major service and commercial centers on Newfoundland's south coast. The Newman Company, an English firm famous for its port wine, had operations here from the 1800s, employing about 100 people in salting, drying, packing, and shipping fish to Europe, Brazil, and the West Indies. During the resettlement programs of the 1960s, the government designated Harbor Breton as a growth center and encouraged people from surrounding isolated communities to relocate there. 700 people moved in between 1965 and 1971, and the town became the unofficial capital of Fortune Bay. Then the fish disappeared. Fishery Products International, the largest fishing company in the province, operated a major plant in Harbor Breton that provided the economic foundation for the entire community. In 2004, the plant closed. Over 100 workers were displaced in a town where there were no alternative employers and no college programs available locally for retraining. The company that reopened the plant in 2006 lasted until 2014 before closing again. Aquaculture, specifically Atlantic salmon farming by companies like Moe and Cook Aquaculture, has provided some reprieve, employing around 150 people at various points, but the industry itself has proven fragile. In 2019, 2.6 million farmed salmon died in a single event attributed to elevated seawater temperatures, and the processing plant went silent again. The population of Harbor Breton dropped from its peak to 1,477 in the 2021 census, and the decline continues. Youth are migrating to cities for education and employment. The population is aging rapidly. Housing for seniors is a growing crisis. Service Canada closed its local office. The Provincial Employment Assistance Office shut down. Number 6. Little Bay Islands in Notre Dame Bay. Little Bay Islands was first settled in 1825 and grew into a bustling community of about 500 people, centered around the cod fishery and, later, crab processing. It was a picturesque outport in Notre Dame Bay, connected to the mainland by a government ferry, with a school, 2 churches, a fire station, and a bed and breakfast. The 1992 moratorium began the decline, and the 2010 closure of the crab processing plant accelerated it. By 2018, there were only 3 paying jobs left in the community: the postmaster and 2 janitors. Most remaining residents were retirees. After years of bitter debate that divided families and lifelong friends, the remaining 54 permanent residents voted to accept a government relocation package. Single residents received $250,000. Families received up to $270,000. The province anticipated $20 million in savings over 20 years by eliminating the need to maintain ferry service, electricity, water systems, and road infrastructure for the community. On New Year's Eve, 2019, The last ferry left Little Bay Islands. The power was cut at 2:30 in the afternoon. The streetlights went dark. The water system was shut down. Two people, a married couple named Michael and Georgina Parsons, chose to stay and live off the grid, using solar panels, generators, and satellite internet. They broadcast the ferry's final departure on Facebook Live. In the 2021 census, Little Bay Islands recorded a population of 0. Today, seasonal residents return in the summers, navigating by private boat since the ferry no longer runs. They use rain collection pods for water, solar panels and generators for electricity, and buckets to flush toilets. The school, H.L. Strong Academy, stands with its parking lot overgrown and library books knocked from shelves. A calendar from 2016 still hangs on the office wall. The community looks intact from the water, but inside the houses, time is doing what time does. Number 7. Goltois on Hermitage Bay. Goltois is a tiny community tucked into a crack in the rock along Newfoundland's south coast, surrounded by steep green mountains that rise like natural walls on every side. It has been settled for centuries, and for most of that time, the sea provided everything the community needed. When the fish disappeared, so did the young people. The fish plant closed, the school shrank, houses emptied. By the early 2020s, the population had dropped to roughly 70 permanent residents, about 1/10 of what it had been in the early 1990s. The government's community relocation policy offered up to $270,000 per household to leave. A vote was held. The community needed 75% approval to trigger resettlement. The vote failed. Some residents were devastated. Others were relieved. The mayor, Gord Hunt, said the government was bullying small towns, wanting to resettle every community that cost money to maintain. He said the outports had made Newfoundland, not St. John's. But he also acknowledged that he wanted to do what was right for his family and his grandchildren. Ron Sims, who ran the tiny grocery store, said living in Goltois was like heaven on earth, and in the same breath admitted that everything had changed. Politicians in the provincial capital, he said, did not understand what was being lost. Number 8. St. Lawrence and the Burin Peninsula. St. Lawrence, on the Burin Peninsula, is a community with one of the most tragic industrial histories in Canada. Fluorspar mining began in the 1930s, providing desperately needed employment during the Depression. Miners worked underground without proper ventilation for decades, extracting the mineral used in aluminium smelting, steel making, and the production of hydrofluoric acid. The consequences were catastrophic. Over the years, an abnormally high number of miners developed lung cancer and other respiratory diseases. Studies revealed that the mines had exposed workers to dangerous levels of radon gas and silica dust. The term St. Lawrence disease became a grim euphemism for occupational death in Newfoundland's mining communities. At least 193 miners eventually died from work-related diseases. The fluorspar mines closed in 1978 when the deposit was exhausted. Like Bell Island, like Buchan's, the closure removed the sole economic anchor of the community. The population declined steadily, from over 2,000 at its peak to approximately 750 by the 2021 census. The Burin Peninsula as a whole, once sustained by a combination of fishing and mining, has experienced decades of erosion. Fish plants have closed, services have been consolidated into larger towns. Young people have left for the same reasons young people leave everywhere in rural Newfoundland. There are no jobs, no opportunities, and the implicit understanding that the future lies elsewhere. And here is the paradox that makes Newfoundland perhaps the most heartbreaking case study in Canadian demographics. You can buy a house in this province for almost nothing. A 2-bedroom home in a declining community on the south coast might list for $9,500. Properties in Buchan's, in the mining towns of the interior, in the fishing outports along the northeast coast, regularly appear on listings for under $25,000. Some go for less than $10,000, a few for less than $5,000. These are not derelict shacks. Many are solid wood frame houses with kitchens and bathrooms and views of the ocean or the boreal forest that would cost millions of dollars in British Columbia or Ontario. The prices are real, the houses are real, and almost nobody wants them. The reasons form a wall of practical impossibility that no amount of scenic beauty can overcome. Winters drop well below -20°C for months. Heating costs devour household incomes, with most homes running on oil furnaces requiring expensive fuel deliveries. Electricity rates have been climbing, driven partly by the Muskrat Falls hydroelectric project, which ballooned from an initial estimate of $7.4 billion to over $13 billion. Groceries cost significantly more in rural communities because everything must be trucked or ferried hundreds of kilometers from the nearest distribution center. Hospitals in rural Newfoundland have been closing or reducing capabilities. The provincial health authority has struggled to recruit physicians for communities outside St. John's. Schools have been merging for decades. In some communities, the nearest doctor is a 2-hour drive. The nearest grocery store might be an hour. Internet is unreliable. Mobile coverage outside major centers is spotty. For anyone needing employment, education, or healthcare, the calculus does not work. And then there is the psychological weight of living in a place where everyone else has left. The empty houses, the closed schools, the boarded-up fish plants and sealed mine entrances, the ferry terminal where the schedule has been reduced to once a day, then 3 times a week, then maybe not at all when the weather turns. There is a loneliness to these places that goes beyond solitude. It is the loneliness of watching a community die slowly while you remain, knowing that each departure of a neighbor or friend means the weight of maintaining the place falls on fewer and fewer shoulders. The grocery store closes because there are not enough customers. The post office reduces its hours. The volunteer fire department cannot recruit new members. The church congregation thins to a handful of gray-haired regulars who remember when every pew was full. The question of whether Newfoundland can be saved from this trajectory is one that policymakers have been wrestling with for decades. Immigration has become the primary strategy for population growth. In 2024, net international migration to the province reached a record high of over 9,000 people, driven largely by newcomers from Ontario and by international immigrants recruited through the Provincial Nominee Program and the Atlantic Immigration Program. The province's population briefly ticked upward, reaching its highest level since 1997. But federal immigration cuts announced in 2025, reducing the number of permanent resident slots nationwide, have already begun to erode these gains. In the fourth quarter of 2024, Newfoundland and Labrador lost 301 people, the first population decline in 15 quarters. Remote work has been cited as a potential savior, and the pandemic did accelerate a trend of people moving from higher-cost provinces, drawn by cheap housing and natural beauty. Net interprovincial migration from Ontario alone added over 5,500 people between 2021 and 2024, but most newcomers settled in or near St. John's, the only part of the province with the infrastructure remote workers need. The rural communities that are dying saw little of this influx. The provincial government has projected that the total population will decrease by 3.4% by 2044, with most regions recording significant decline, while only the St. John's area is expected to grow. The communities that resisted resettlement in this decade will face the question again in the next. The ferry services that cost millions for shrinking populations will be further scrutinized. The infrastructure that keeps people connected to hospitals and groceries will continue to deteriorate. Since 2009, communities have officially resettled under the provincial relocation policy. Great Harbour Deep in 2002, Petites in 2003, Big Brook in 2004, Grand Brook in 2010, Round Harbour in 2016, Williams Harbour in 2017, Snook's Arm in 2018, Little Bay Islands in 2019, and in 2025, the last 4 residents of Tilt Cove, a town once famous for having the smallest population of any incorporated municipality in Canada, announced they would all accept resettlement. Each disappearance is quiet, a vote is taken, papers are signed, checks are issued, the power is cut, the ferry makes its last run, and another pin is removed from the map of Newfoundland, another name that will be spoken only in past tense by people who used to live there. Newfoundland is perhaps the most heartbreaking example of emptying in all of Canada, and maybe in all of North America. This is not a province that was marginal or forgettable. This is a place with one of the richest cultures and deepest histories on the continent. European fishermen were working these waters before Columbus reached the Caribbean. The outports produced a distinct dialect of English, a tradition of storytelling and music, a culture of self-reliance and community that was forged over centuries of coexistence with the North Atlantic. The colorful wooden houses that climb the hillsides of Newfoundland's coves have appeared on postcards and travel brochures around the world. Icebergs the size of apartment buildings drift past the coast every spring. Whales breach in the bays. The landscape is ancient, dramatic, and staggeringly beautiful. And none of it matters, economically. You can buy a house for the price of a phone, but the fish are gone, the mines are flooded, the mills are closed, the young have left, and the government is paying people to abandon the communities their families built centuries ago. The most recent community to consider resettlement will not be the last. The ferry schedules will be cut again. Another school will close. Another church will lock its doors for the final time. And the wind will keep blowing through the streets of outports where nobody lives anymore, past wharves where no boats are tied, past fish plants where no one works, past houses with curtains still drawn and doors still closed, as if the people inside just stepped out for a moment and forgot to come back. That is what emptying looks like. Not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow, steady exhale, the kind of breath a province takes when it has been holding on for too long and finally, quietly, lets go.